Okay, I've got a riddle for you. What do you get when you take a business technology consultant and you cram him into the product team of a SaaS company that sells a SaaS product exclusively to IT companies who sell IT services to other small businesses? You have the ultimate technology turducken, also known as Ash Welsh. He's a senior product manager at ScalePad. He works on the Quoter team. And my interview today with him was really interesting because we started on the business consulting side of like what makes somebody a good or bad candidate for digital or technological transformation, how MSPs can use those sort of same buying signals to know whether or not somebody's going to be a good candidate to purchase managed services, adopt managed services. And then the conversation just became more and more tactical as we talked about ways that you can save time in your sales admin processes and just really, really cool ideas for visualizing standard operating procedures. Look, the guy's got a lot to say. I'll shut my mouth. Let's get into it. Ash Welsh, we've been talking for a while and you're finally on a hot mic with me. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Dude, you know what is exciting today is because I don't get to talk to a lot of people who do consulting. That's sort of my background, is coming into other businesses and sort of fixing broken sales process. And so I was really excited as we were sort of prepping for today's interview. With your history, you don't come from managed services, you come from business consulting. I want to talk about that a little bit. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, maybe real quick, who you are, where you're from, and then talk to me a little bit about how you got into doing business consulting before you were in your current role.
Yeah, for sure. So senior product manager at Quoter, recently acquired by ScalePad, so servicing the MSP community. And so early in my career, I was a technology consultant working with businesses and very convoluted software to try and bridge that gap, take the business processes, take the technology, work with people on re-engineering their companies in some cases, or really, pushing the technology to its limits. But just trying to find that sweet spot where you can make the business run more efficiently. And so really that's what I bring to the product side with MSPs now as well.
Sure.
How do we take technology in a very broad sense? There's all kinds of aspects that go into software development, and make sure that, the business processes, which are all, like, constantly evolving too, businesses are not static. And so you need to be fluid and flexible in how you think about the problems you're solving. But really it comes down to the conversation between the end users and the developers, and bring that together and you've got great technology.
So I want to go back to something you said a second ago. You said sometimes a business would essentially, you'd almost have to rebuild a business. But what your role was taking businesses who relied on esoteric or complicated applications. And are you saying that your job was to basically force those applications into a business, or was it more about helping a business get the most possible value out of that application, or was it somewhere in the middle?
I would say it's somewhere in the middle, but there was less product development going on with the technology that I was consulting on. And so it was more that the tech stack was very flexible, but it was still limited. So it was going into the business and saying, you guys see an opportunity here. You've decided on using this software. Now I'm here to help you understand the gaps, but also, the opportunities. And a lot of times people don't want to think about changing their business to meet software. And these days you shouldn't have to, really. Like, there's innumerable products out there, but there's still that conversation that every business owner needs to have, which is, how do we get the most out of this technology? Right. And so you will run up against, unless you're developing all your own tech and you've got, in-house developers building exactly what you need, which ultimately actually is, I think, longer term where we're going to circle back to in the technology space is, and this is a tangent, but we went through this era of bigger technology companies owning huge mass market share. And then you get into all these niche players, which has been the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I think it's going to come full circle in the fairly near future, where we're getting back to really more flexible technology that you can maybe sort of almost build yourself as you're going. If you're running a business, the technology is flexible and adapting to your needs. But that's entirely tangential to
between
to
the
your
cost
question.
of between the rapidly diminishing cost of cloud computing and the rapidly diminishing barriers to entry with AI for development. I see what you mean. Like everybody could run their own ERP, their own line of business app that they could develop themselves at some point. So that makes sense. But I want to ask you this question, because when you're working with a business who has to evolve, you're going through, for lack of a better term, you're going through some sort of a digital transformation with a business, like an operational transformation.
Yeah.
But when you were working with businesses or maybe evaluating businesses to work with, were there indicators of like things that would make somebody a good candidate to actually have a successful transformation versus a bad candidate who is like just not going to evolve, not going to adopt it? And what were some of those signals?
The biggest one was, the people involved in the project. If the people were flexible, they would make their business more flexible, their organizational structure more flexible. If they were open to change and open to creative problem solving and open to working with others on finding the best path forward instead of just being more rigid, that was the number one indicator. And I see that today. I talk to MSPs all the time, and some are, generally the smaller ones are a little more flexible because they have fewer people wearing more hats and they're more agile. As you get bigger, it gets harder. Change management's harder in larger organizations, but that still is one of the main key indicators. It's just hard to change processes that are locked into a whole bunch of people. You have to change people to change business.
See, that makes sense. The reason I'm asking that question is I think this is something relevant for MSPs. If you're going for a new prospect who's not already, for example, who hasn't yet adopted managed services, so they have break fix or in-house or something like that, it can be a very jarring transformation to go to hiring an MSP, or even changing MSPs is like really traumatic, and that's why people stay with crappy MSPs for so long. But the reason I was asking that is that maybe an MSP could know, like, what should I look for in somebody who's more viable to be a potential candidate to actually work with me and actually like come along with the journey, or somebody who's just not worth the pursuit?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Certainly like a fit analysis of some kind, looking at, are they currently using an MSP or not? Those are kinds of things that you could dig into to try to understand, are they going to have a really hard time working with you as an MSP? Yeah. And, some of that does come back more directly to the tactics of the sales process. It's a hard job that MSPs have when they're trying to sell what they do, because it's very complicated. It's not just managed services. It's managed services, it's hardware, it's projects. And more is being encompassed under managed services, which obviously makes sense. From a business standpoint, you need to move away from the break fix, the one-off work, and move to more of a recurring revenue model. But it's a hard thing, I would say, to communicate that to a prospect, because they don't understand the technology. They don't really understand what they need. And you're just wrapping everything up into, here's what you're going to pay on a monthly basis. And here's all this like upfront cost or one-time fees as well. The analogy I always go back to in my head is, walking into a car dealership and you need either to buy a new car or just to maintain your car. Usually the maintenance is more along those lines, because you don't know what your car needs. Most people don't have any idea, what maintenance is required on a car. And there's that fear, right? There's fear that the MSP doesn't know what they need, or they're going to sell them something they don't need, or they're going to have all the right, line items in front of them and make it sound like they know what they're doing, but not necessarily cover them for everything that they need. Like, it's similar to the car mechanic. You went in and got your transmission fixed. Well, do you know your transmission is fixed? Do you know it's not going to break down in 6 months? So it ultimately, I think, all comes down to trust.
Even like, to double down on your analogy, you can get certified as a mechanic, but like there is no regulation around somebody calling themselves an MSP. All you got to do is, there's plenty of companies who are just a break fix company who's charged monthly, and they call themselves an MSP. And then you have people who are like handling total global risk and compliance, everything that they can, and they're just calling themselves an MSP. And some people are calling themselves an MSSP because they have an outsourced NOC services or something, and they're like, oh, now I'm an MSSP. And there's no governance, there's no standardization. So a little Sally CEO might have even had an MSP 6 years ago, and now she thinks that's what managed services is. And now she sees another MSP with $100 per seat higher price, but thinks that doesn't know how to compare the two. So you're right. Like you don't want to go to the mechanic and they sell you a flux capacitor because there's nothing you can do to stop them. But mainly it's like, I want my car to work and I just want to pay a reasonable price, and then I don't really want to talk about it anymore. Right?
Exactly.
So what do you say to, because you talk to a lot of MSPs, right? I'm imagining that you run into what I run into, that selling managed services, explaining managed services is one of the hardest parts of running an MSP, is helping people understand what you do and why it's essential. How do you suggest MSPs go about doing that and building trust along the way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things that they do outside of the technology that I work in. Obviously, the human touch points, the conversations, the getting to know the people. But a lot of it does come down to, the professionalism, the brand, word of mouth, making sure that you're doing the best possible job you can to communicate what you're doing.
Yeah.
And how you speak to it, how you present it, all of that comes into play, of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, not quota specific, but I think you need to put your best foot forward. You need to make sure you're on brand, sure. What you're putting out there by way of proposals is professional, and listen to feedback. If you get feedback from customers on any part of your sales process, just feed that back into how do you learn from that experience and form stronger relationships moving forward.
And I appreciate, you're very gracefully dancing around it, but you sell a tool that helps people be more professionally. And I'll say it for you. If you've got, in managed services, to your point, professionalism, brand, just demonstrating actual competence and kindness it's shockingly effective. Just doing the basic human being stuff. I have a former business partner who went to USC Business School, and he taught a guest lecture at USC Business School called "Don't Be a Dick," and it was a networking class. And that was literally the whole class. He was like, "You'd be shocked how many people they get their first exciting job and they don't really know how to handle the responsibility, or they're thinking too much, or their imposter syndrome sets in and they overcorrect, and then they're just unpleasant to work with." And it's shocking how many MSPs are just, frankly, they're not that pleasant to talk to. They're not that pleasant to meet with because of some of those reasons. So if you're just like a normal professional business, you're already in the 75th percentile of MSPs, right? In a sales interaction.
Right.
But if you have 3 conversations to build your entire reputation, and one of them is a presentation, surely you should put some serious thought into how you're laying out that information.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. Especially on the managed services side. Like you said, that's the piece that they're getting hit with every single month. They need to make sure that makes sense to them. Like, what level of security are you paying for? What kind of maintenance are you getting on your hardware? What is wrapped up in here? So, I mean, the communication piece builds into trust hugely. And that can be, mouth-to-mouth communication. It can be all of that, but it also needs to be the hard copy of your proposal or your quote. It just needs to be easy to understand, easy to visualize, easy to interact with, and ultimately easy for the MSP to create, because they don't want to spend their time doing this. They want to be spending their time on being good problem solvers and really, identifying those technical challenges. Mm-hmm. But the role goes beyond that. And like you say, it comes down to being a good person, building those relationships.
Right. That's most of the work, honestly. Before you go and buy a tool, first ask yourself, did I smile? Did I shake their hand? Did I use their first name? That's the sort of basics, right? To cover those bases. But I want to ask you some technical questions. I get asked a lot of these technical A/B split testing questions that you probably have 100 times more data than I do on this. So I want to ask you a couple things and just see if you have any thoughts. For an MSP who's in the bidding process or the quoting process, should they generate a term sheet or like a simple quote for their proposal, a statement of work, and then have a master service agreement as like a separate phase of the like purchasing buyer's motion? Or do you recommend that they do all of that at one time?
I recommend that they do it at one time with the first initial quote. I think getting the managed services pieces in there so that you've got that groundwork and foundation to build upon, you can reference it later. You don't need it in every single one, but I think that helps build trust. I think it really does. I think making sure that you've got, and you don't need pages and pages. You can reference other content elsewhere, but I think
so
having
link out
that
to
in
some of the
place-
terms and conditions and stuff you're saying.
Yeah, a lot of MSPs do that, and I think that's totally fine because you don't want to overwhelm the person, but I think you need to give them all the information that they need to make that decision, especially if it's a prospect. If it's your first time this person is signing off on something with you, you're trying to build a long relationship, you don't want to make it a two-step process. You don't want to have them go through all this legalese and agree to that in advance of actually, figuring out what it's going to cost. I think the two need to be married.
That's really cool to hear because you guys probably analyze a lot of like transactions and you probably know a lot of quotes that go out and see how many of them are, you probably have a bunch of information. And I've always been curious if some people want to like get the terms of the deal up front, meaning like, here's your price, here's your onboarding fee, and then sign it. And then by the way, now sign our MSA later as a secondary phase. And I've wondered if there's merit to doing it that way, or if you lose people at the MSA phase, because now you might get stuck in some of the redlining when. So what I'm hearing from you is you should consider that one motion and one conversation in the sales cycle, right?
Yeah, again, this isn't really my area of expertise. So I have some of these conversations with MSPs, but I wouldn't say I've got the perfect solution. But that's what comes to mind. And that's what I do here is that first touch point is very important. And I think getting everything on the table there as far as what's that relationship look like moving forward and what are the recurring fees that we're going to incur moving forward. I think just being honest and transparent about that up front and making sure there's no big questions all at once, I think is the way to do it. Yeah.
Right. And you know what? You and I had this conversation. We were talking with Julie on your team a couple of weeks ago about tying back to trust, what you brought up earlier. Building trust is like everything, obviously, for MSPs. And that's why a lot of MSPs, they'll keep their clients for like 10, 20 years, because of this reason. And then they get word of mouth. And because it's like you're giving somebody all your passwords. You really want to know that they're legit before they get in there and get that much access to your whole business. Here's what I found. Even with existing clients, we might have you bring in a new technical account manager or something. And sometimes it takes that person a long time to develop any rapport or relationship in a client. But the people who actually really have the best relationship with the end users are your techs.
Yeah, because they engage with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, right. And they're like on the phone. They're helping them. They're engaging with them.
Yes.
So in an ideal world, the revenue generators are the people who you've already got established rapport, you have established trust.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I want to hear from you on this because we've talked about how I know Quoter is a big resource for this. But what is some of your advice you have for an MSP who they've got field techs, or maybe it's even an owner who's out there doing the technical work right then. But can we somehow fuse together the sales motion and the sort of technical support motion into one conversation even? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you think.
Absolutely. So we completely buy into that philosophy and that approach at Quoter, and that's why all of our plans have unlimited users. And we just feel like sales should be part of your business, overall business. It shouldn't be something that one person's doing. It shouldn't be something that only one person has visibility on. Mm-hmm. It should be your techs. It should be people running your QBRs. Sometimes they're, those are the most valuable people in your organization. Like you say, they're building that rapport with your clients. So yeah, absolutely. Everything from the tickets that are created in the PSA, it's easy enough to link those back to a quote. And we really encourage people to get their technicians in Quoter, get them familiar with it. It's easy to learn. And I would say that should be something you consider from a business standpoint, is when you're not just quoting, not just proposal building, but when you're looking at any tool, look at the people in your organization that should be helping you manage that tool. And if in the MSP space, it's the technicians that are getting those tickets about slow laptops, and they're getting, frustrated people because of X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. If that requires a proposal or a quote or anything, figure out what the tool is, make sure those people have access. Don't create silos and bottlenecks in your organization. Really make sure your organization is flat and fluid, and make sure that the tools you're looking at are easy enough to use that those people can use them and can learn them. And when there's new staff, they can learn them very quickly and ramp up immediately. Those are the kinds of things that I think MSPs don't focus on as much because they're technical. They're used to being in very technical solutions. They're used to maybe outdated, horrible UIs in some cases and having to go through help articles to figure things out. But not everyone in your organization is going to be that technically savvy or even wanting to spend the time doing that. So make sure that you've got tools that are accessible to the people that you've hired.
Right. I really appreciated, that's why I just brought it up again, because I appreciate your take on this topic, and it takes me back to my MSP. I tried and failed like 3 or 4 versions to get techs to help us like move hardware and stuff. So the first thing I did was, because I'm in sales, I'm a sales dude. I'm not a technical dude. So I thought, okay, what's going to motivate these guys to push hardware is money. So we put in this like spiff program where like, hey, if you sell this, well, you get a spiff. Is basically like another way of saying commission, right? And dude, the adoption rate was like 0%. They were like,
it's not what they want to be doing.
reporting.
It's not how they're motivated. Yeah.
No, they're just like, they're like, no, this is just my job is to fix the problem. And so that's when I realized, getting a user or getting a stakeholder to purchase something for a user's experience, it should not be considered a separate motion owned by the revenue team. It's really just, that's how you close the ticket. Like, okay, what this person needs is a new keyboard. I have to buy one and they have to pay for it. And then I could close the ticket. So could we make those 2 processes instead of making a technician think, now I sell a keyboard, I go get the quote. And this was also in the old days, dude, where I had to like go to the disties direct and find and the prices were like different all the time, and there was no real-time portal. So it was a real monster of pain in the butt. There was like 6 emails to quote out somebody like a Sonic wall back and forth with my distributor.
Right.
And it was like $4 different every time I called. So, it was a nightmare. But I realized, rather than telling my techs to think of this like a sales function, what I need to do is empower them to think of it like a technical service delivery function. But can we skip the entire SOP of getting sales involved? Can we just make it super clean? There's a standard version of everything so that they don't have to get approval on like, which keyboard do I sell? You sell this one. Which laptop do I sell? You sell this one. And then they could go, this is what it is. And right there, it's like, sign the work order, sign the quote. Here you go. It'll be on your next invoice, or we just billed you for it. Okay, I'll come back tomorrow and install it. And all of a sudden, they started selling hardware like crazy because they thought of it, because they were empowered to think of it as a part of just doing their technical job. And it wasn't, before it was like, CC the account manager who has to make sure that they get it was such a pain in the ass. And we have to build an opportunity manually in Autotask, and then I add it to their contract stuff. So that's what is exciting about the way that you think about business process, is that I feel like you're very good at taking away those silos, which should not exist in an MSP wherever possible.
And not even just MSPs, like business in general. But yes, we're talking about MSPs here. Absolutely. Like, so often we think about things in compartmentalized fashion, and business process, business operations, roles within an organization, you really have to think about your specific business, because it's going to be different than everyone else's. Yes, there's some similarities MSP to MSP, but if you have technicians that are thinking in a very narrow fashion about how they're solving the problem. Well, are they actually solving the problem? If they've gone in and fixed something and it doesn't require anything new and there's no aspect of growing the business through it, then sure, okay, that's totally fine. But there are cases where, like you say, the problem's not done until you've actually ordered that piece of hardware or upgraded some software or done something that may or may not require a sign-off on either a change to managed services or a new piece of hardware or who knows what. But take time to think about those processes within your business and who's doing what. And I'm a very visual person. I like sketching things out. If I was running MSP today, I would look at every single one of my business processes and figure out who does it, how many different handoffs are there, and what tools are being used. And how do you bring that into a much simpler format wherever those opportunities exist?
I love that. I really love that. And you shouldn't be buying another tool unless it like reduces a handoff or like skips a step.
Yep.
You know, but if your SOP gets longer because you're using this tool now instead of shorter, or if it gets more complicated, you probably don't need that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would entirely agree. And also think about how you're using your existing tools, because that's, I think, something a lot of MSPs don't necessarily spend a lot of time on. Some do. Some are more operationally mature and they know all their processes are dialed and they know what they're doing where. But very often I talk to MSPs that are not taking advantage of the tools they have and they're jumping to something else. And that's just added friction, added change management, added inefficiency. So make sure that if you are currently using a tool, make sure you're getting the most out of it. Often that's not the case.
Can I ask you a sort of a cheeky question?
Of course.
On this note, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a minute. So Quoter's been around a long time. I think a lot of people probably know about what Quoter is. You're a quoting tool. It's in your name. But there's a big chunk of MSPs out there that are just Excel warriors.
Right.
They're killing it with Ingram Micro. They got Cynics in their back pocket wrapped around their little finger. They've got it all built out, and they spent 3 years perfecting their little Excel quotes, and they mail merge a bunch of prices into Office, and maybe they're loving that. Is there a case to be made for the Excel warrior who's like, I don't really want to add another tool to my stack. I just want to use Office to generate all my quotes. And for if I want to add a mouse or a keyboard or something, like at some point, is it not worth adding another tool?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself a few questions if you're in that camp. And I did that 10 years ago. I was working at a very small company. We didn't do a lot of quotes. We were doing calculations in Excel, moving them over to Word, PDFing them, and sending them out. And I mean, the first thing is that's a time-intensive process. So even if you think you've got it dialed, you probably don't. So time it. Time it, and then calculate how many times you're doing that in a month. Because when I was doing that, even simple quotes were taking 45 minutes. It shouldn't. A simple quote should take 2 minutes. Yeah, a really complicated quote with 100 line items, sure, 45 minutes. Yeah. And MSPs have that. They have to deal with some very complicated quotes sometimes. So, I mean, that's step one, is really figure out the time it takes you to build the quote, figure out how often you're doing that every month. Then look at the quote. Those PDFs you're sending, how do you compare to other MSPs out there? Are you building that trust? Are you representing your brand? Are you doing the things that people expect from a really professional business? And I'd argue in most cases, you're probably not. There's probably some branding issues. It probably doesn't look great. And then more important than that, are the calculations always right? Are you actually calculating the margin that you expect? Are your salespeople, meeting thresholds that you expect for your business? Where are you leaving money on the table? If you've got it all dialed and you're doing one quote a month, yeah, okay, keep going. Good for you. There's no problem with that. I mean, there's no perfect product for any one organization. And if your system is dialed, stick with what you're doing. You're doing the right thing. If not, if you have any gaps in the people that are performing the jobs and how you've allocated roles within your organization or the tools you're using, then look for change. Everything's changing all the time. You should be changing somewhat too.
This is such a profoundly perfect answer to my question, because I feel like MSP owners, and probably everybody, this is just the people I talk to, they're too smart for their own good sometimes. So I'm thinking of the people who they spend hours and hours and hours on like PowerShell automation to shave 45 seconds off the start of their day so that they boot up their computer exactly the way they want it to. And then they're over here bean counting later, spending 2 hours to quote out a used laptop. And when you don't have process like you're talking about, there is no difference between a big quote or a small quote. They both take a long time. Like when you have to sort of do it by hand, a little quote and a big quote both take the same amount of time. Because quoter is not going to make it so that like, hey, I can suss out, I can do all my technical discovery and have a perfect custom-made proposal in 2 minutes. That's not what quoter sells. What quoter sells is much more about standardizing your higher velocity quotes. At least that's my understanding of it, right? And of course, you have templates and all that stuff, I'm sure, for the bigger form stuff. But the amount of time that people will agonize over shaving seconds off of certain parts of their business process, only to completely neglect other areas that they're just less excited about automating, or that they don't know how to automate, and they'll just lose all that time back in those areas. So that's why I think your answer is going to make a great social media moment.
Well, I work with engineers and developers all the time. And if they were just running amok, doing their own thing, they would be focused on those tiny problems that, like you say, shave seconds off or make an interface, nanoseconds faster. And they love it. And MSPs are technical people. They love those technical solutions. That's where they enjoy spending their time. But, when business comes into the picture, you have to think about operational efficiency. You have to think about the right people in the right seats. You have to think about the right tools. And you have to be able to step back from what do I really like doing and what do I really need to do? And a lot of times, sales is an afterthought. And a lot of times, the tools that are being used are hard to learn, are hard to use. It's hard to get an accurate quote out of some of these. So you're probably drawn to Excel. When you look at the interface for Excel versus the interface of a lot of our competitors, it doesn't look much better. So I mean, what I like to preach is that efficiency. And it's efficiency from an organizational standpoint. It's efficiency from a sales framework or sales process standpoint. And it's also efficiency from at a tactical level. When you are trying to get a quote at the door, you should be able to pre-configure as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And that's where templating really comes into play. And most of the other tools out there, I'm not going to get into specifics, but most of them offer some form of templating. But very few really take that philosophy of, can you do this thing in advance? If the answer is yes, you should do it in advance. Because you want to close the gap between quote creation and quote sent. Ultimately, not every quote's getting accepted. And you really need to trim down the effort that it takes to get that quote out the door. Right. And so that means, if it's your MSA that you need on every single initial new business quote, get that pre-configured in there. If it's nice proposal content, get that pre-configured in there. If it's sometimes we take payment and sometimes we don't, get that pre-configured in there. Absolutely everything you can pre-configure and really workshop that. Figure out those different flows. What types of different individuals or different companies do we end up working with? So take the time to plan that out and configure every possibility. It's probably only 5 to 10. You'll do that work once and you'll see the benefits for years. Right.
I love that. And then just buy back, like Dan Martell's buy back your time. It's a very simple concept. Well, and he didn't coin that concept either, but figure out how much money you are worth an hour and then break it down into 15-minute intervals. And just remember, every time I give 15 minutes to something, like if your time is worth $200 an hour, a 15-minute task costs you $50, period. So that's the way to think of it, right? And scale it out. But now I want to end this interview by coming back full circle. We started at the top talking about as a business consultant, helping people on the sales side. Here's the thing. The fallacy for the average MSP is that Like MSP's number one play for any problem is to buy a tool. They're like, okay, if I have a problem, I just buy a tool and fix that problem. But at some point, you have a big garage full of tools and a bunch of broken stuff because you're so fixated on buying and owning and possessing resources, but then you don't take the time to implement or develop or learn or master any of them. So the fallacy, I think, is that people think that simply buying a sales tool is the same as developing a sales process. It's like, okay, now I can make a quote fast. That means my sales process is dialed in. Do you see what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. It's a very big fallacy. The tool doesn't make you better. What makes you better is doing the hard work of going out, doing your marketing, meeting people in your community, getting to know, where the opportunities are. But when you think about your time and you think about your professionalism and you think about how you're building trust, that's where the tool comes in. And if you're not using the tool properly, start using it. Don't look for another tool. If you're not getting something out of a tool, start there first. Yeah, of course, we are building software. We want people to use our software. We want to build the best software out there. But if someone's got their process perfectly dialed in another tool, that's fine. I've got no problems with that.
Sure.
If you don't, if there are gaps, if there are ways where you're needing to change your business, then look at options and look at another tool. But I mean, to counter your fallacy, I think we're in times where that is changing. I think people, organizations, MSPs are looking at ways to reduce cost, and they are looking at consolidating tools, and they are not just jumping on the next shiny object. And so it's a very opportune time to look at those business processes, look at the tools you have, and reinvest in them perhaps.
Right. But yeah, main point being that if you need a tool, buy it. But there's a difference between going to trade school to be a mechanic and buying a lift to pick up cars. Like just because you have a lift does not mean you know how to fix cars. But at some point, if you're a mechanic, there's a lot of limitations that you will have if you don't have a lift, because you can only fix stuff that you don't need to get under the car for. So developing the trade, like a true master tradesman will use a few tools perfectly. Right. And an amateur tradesman will fixate on tools thinking that the tool will make them a better tradesperson, So I think I want to separate to people that it does take both. But of course, like I was a jazz drummer for a long time, and I played. I had a small kit because I traveled all the time and I didn't have a roadie, so I had to put drums in the back of my car all the time. And I would go, and there's like when you go to like a concert or a Lollapalooza or something, and you have like amateur rock drummers, they'll have like 40 drums and 50 cymbals, and it's like they have no idea how to really master any of them, but they just keep buying more and more drums to be a better drummer. But you look at like the best jazz drummers in the world played with like 3 drums and 2 cymbals, and they smoked everybody because they had the tools they needed and they perfectly used them. Yeah. And that was always my mantra as a musician, like don't buy another thing until you've mastered the things that you use. But at some point you have to realize you will hit a ceiling with the tools that you have. So anyway, I think it's great that people like you are out here making software to help MSPs do their job. And my job, my self-appointed job sometimes is to find the tools that I think are not helpful. And those people don't make it on my podcast. But I've been talking to you guys to be clear to the listener, I've literally been talking to Quoter for almost 2 years about ways that we can collaborate to help the channel. Because I just believe in what you're doing. I think it's a good idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think when it's contextualized, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. But listen, you've given me 40 minutes. I'm super appreciative. Is there anything else you want to say to the lovely people before we wrap it up today?
I think just lastly, when you're looking to take advantage of the tools that you have, think about it a little bit differently. Don't just think about it in features. Don't just think about it in integrations. Think about it in accessibility. Think about it in usability. Think about change management across your organization. As staff turnover happens, like how hard is it for people to learn that tool? So there are a lot of challenges with a lot of what MSPs do. And any ways you can find to streamline, simplify, and make your business processes easy to understand and easy to communicate, that will help you operationally. So take that business consultant hat, put it on your head. Anyone in the organization, doesn't need to be the CEO. Think about how you're doing things and how you could be doing them better.
I love it. Ash, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you so much for being here. Where should people reach out if they want to learn more about you or what you do?
I think just our website. We've got lots of information there. Also, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn if you got any questions. And yeah, happy to walk you through what Coder's doing today and all the exciting stuff we have planned for the future.
Right on. Thanks again.